what most folks in the UFO research community associate owls with is the screen memory of owls. It's very common for people to say, oh, I was driving down the road at night and I saw this great big owl and I pulled right up to it and it was looking at me over the hood of the car, and then I drove on, and when I got home, I was home a few hours late. That's a classic thing. Then if they went through hypnotic regression, this is certainly something that comes up, and hypnosis is a tricky subject, and I'm cautious not to put too much weight into that. But the hypnotherapist might ask, oh, so describe this owl. And the person under hypnosis might say, well, it's got big black eyes, it's about 4 feet tall, it's got a little spacesuit on, it's got a big bald head, and so they're describing something that's not an owl. The implication is that there's a psychic projection coming from these alien beings that is somehow projected into the mind of the observer. And instead of seeing a little gray alien, which would be scary, they instead see an owl. Now, there's all kinds of other things too. They can see deer and clowns and raccoons and cats, and Jesus shows up in this too. It's not uncommon for people in this context to say, like, oh, I saw Jesus on the side of the road, and it didn't make much sense. And so, now Dolores Cannon, who studied this subject in depth, she was at a point in her life when she was at a meeting with her colleagues, and she was doing what amounted to rather straight therapy, like a clinician or a counselor, straight therapy with using hypnosis, quitting smoking, alleviating tension, that kind of type of stuff. Now, she had a meeting with some of her colleagues, and she said, like, what's happening? I'm getting this UFO stuff, and I'm not sure whether to go into depth with this. I got to make a decision. Do I follow this path and see where it leads? And that night she was driving home. So the night she had to make the decision about the UFO stuff, she was driving home, and there was an owl on the road in front of her. She pulls right up to it, and this is something I've heard many times, and I just mentioned it before. The owl's looking at her above the hood of her car. Now, owls can get pretty big. They're pretty big birds, but they are not big enough to look over the hood of a car. Even a small car at a big owl, you're not going to see it from the driver's seat if you pull right up to it. So she pulls right up to it, and it's looking at her. And then she said she felt bad. She didn't want to hit this thing. And it flew up the road, and then she got closer, and it flew up the road, and it led her to her house, and then it waited at her driveway when she turned in. Years later, she was at a museum of natural history in London. She had been speaking in London, and there's a big glass case with all these owls. And she walked and looked at every single owl, and she realized right away that what she saw wasn't an owl. It didn't match any of these owls, and none of them were big enough to match what she had seen. And so this is this funny gray zone, right? She doesn't have any claims to have had UFO contact, right? She describes the owl flying down the road, right? And that's not what like an alien can do. So, but she's also having this. She's clearly, her memory doesn't match what a real owl would, how big it would be. So there's this foggy netherworld to try to, like, we'll never have a true answer to what she may or may not have seen that night. But to me, the most important part of the story is that was the night she had to choose. She chose, obviously, she went down the path of doing UFO research. So that, to me, is the most important part of the story. And whether that was so you talk to a UFO researcher, right? Someone who does abduction research. Say, hey, you have any stories about owls? And they'll like, oh God, I've got owl stories. Sure. And then they'll describe the screen memory aspect. They'll tell people, oh, they see owls, and we do a little investigating, and it seems that there's some sort of psychic projection.